Today, I'm sitting with Greg Olsen, a research scientist, entrepreneur, cosmonaut, and venture capitalist. Greg sold his business Sensors Unlimited for $600 million, which he later bought back for $6 million, and then he sold it again for $60 million. Greg was also the third private citizen to travel to the ISS in outer space. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Greg, as you know, I bring people onto the show that I consider to be docents. I've redefined that word docent as people that inspire, influence, and guide others. These are the people that are the most relentless people. They're the ultimate competitors. They're high achievers. They refuse to be satisfied with their God-given abilities, and they just push further and further ahead. They are the most persistent and enduring people on the planet because they are our docents. And Greg, you, my friend, you are a docent. So I'd like to dive in to learn who your docents were growing up and who motivated you, inspired you, influenced, and guided you. So here we go.
Sure.
So Greg, where did you grow up?
I was born in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, but I grew up in northern New Jersey, in Ridgefield Park. That's where I, from 10 to about 22, lived there. And that's, I guess, what stamped me most was Bergen County, New Jersey.
And let's talk about your parents. Like, what does your mother do for a living? What does your dad do?
Sure. My dad was an electrician. He was a local 3 electrician. My mom was a school teacher, but she was basically a homemaker. We grew up, it was the typical, 1950s life. It wasn't ideal. My parents didn't get along, fought a lot, a bit of alcohol mixed in there. And I never got along with my dad. He was a tough guy. It's my way or the highway. And I remember that, there's one thing about electricians, the hands. The hands are like vice grips because they use them all day long. And whenever I stepped out of line, I'd feel those vice grips coming around my neck. And, that was it. One thing I'm really glad about now in 2021 is that it basically is not accepted to hit kids.
Yeah, that's right.
When I was a kid, it was totally accepted. And, we would, among my friends, we say, hey, my old man batted me around. He did this, he did that. Yeah. We'd all laugh and, have a joke about it. But, I think that's an improvement on life. But I tried to avoid my dad because he was often, in a bad mood. And if I did anything wrong, he'd just come down on me. But in the end, he was the one that got me to go to college because I was a big screw up in high school. I had all C's at best, was suspended twice, got convicted of juvenile delinquency in Bergen County Court. I mean, talk about most likely to succeed. It certainly wasn't me. And my plan was I was going to join the Army. This is pre-Vietnam. And then probably study electrical work in the Army and then join my dad's union. So I went and took the tests for the Army, passed with flying colors. But I was only 17 when I graduated high school. I needed my parents' signature. So I give this form to my dad. And what should have happened is something like, you stupid effing kid, why do you want to do something so stupid as this? He would have thrown the papers back at me. I would have forged his name and gone into the Army. Instead, he looked up at me and quietly said, Greg, it's getting tough to get into the union now. They're going to start requiring 6 months of college. Why don't you try it? And if you don't like it, I'll sign the form. My father was never reasonable like that. And I was so taken back that it was just like, the Jackie Gleason, yamana, yamana, yama, okay. And that totally turned my life around. I mean, after all those years of, just arguing and fighting, just one thing. And, I barely got into Fairleigh Dickinson because I had failed trigonometry in high school. So I had to make it up in the summertime. And that's kind of another symbol of my life. I've always scrambled. I've had a lot of crap happen in my life, and you just deal with it. Stress, I probably thrive on stress. I don't see where they say, well, stress causes cancer and bad, high blood pressure. Maybe it does. I'm no medical person, but for me, it's been a motivator. It's just like in school, fear. My first semester at Fairleigh Dickinson, all C's. The dean calls me in and says, Olsen, you can't do engineering with all C's. Either you step up or you're out. And I went out of there shaking in my pants. And that fear got me to raise my grades, and I wound up on the dean's list.
So I'm going to back you up a little bit here. You mentioned your dad. I read that you said your dad was a bit of a handyman around the house, like a repairman a lot. My grandfather was actually like that. He was a carpenter by trade in New York City and moved down to the Jersey Shore. It was really, just seeing him like always do things himself and working with his hands was kind of an inspiring thing. Did you feel that way growing up, or did you just have an appreciation for it as you got older?
100%. My father thought it was evil to ever call a repairman. You just figured it out yourself.
Yeah.
Our first TV was a 10-inch black and white. And I remember when it failed, which it often did in those days, he just went right, took it apart and figured it out. Same with our oil burner when it stopped working. I just remember, and he had never taken an oil burner apart in his life, but he figured it out, and he just had that. Some people have that talent, and he sure did.
My grandfather did, like I said. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't learn a lot because if I'd ask him a question, he'd often wind up yelling at me. Like, how does
that's my
this work?
stepdad.
But, I sort of learned at a distance.
Yeah. Yeah, my stepfather was like that. He's a carpenter as well. And I didn't learn a lot with my hands. And I think it was by design because he didn't want me to do what he did for a living. So don't teach his kid this stuff because then he's going to follow my footsteps doing that. I want him to do something else. I want him to advance himself in life, So he would always be like, get out of here. You don't know what you're doing.
Well, in my life, I went from wanting to be an electrician when I was a boy, and then I stepped up to a TV repairman. And then after Sputnik happened in 1957, I decided to try and be an engineer. I mean, that was the plan, but it almost didn't work out.
Yeah, that was another thing my stepfather always said. You got plans. You always have plans, but everything changes. You think you have all these plans when you're a kid, and you just go through life, and it's not. You end up somewhere totally different than where you thought you were when you were young. That's for sure. Did you have siblings growing up, or were you an only child?
Yes, I had 3 sisters growing up. My oldest one, Amy, passed away about 10 years ago, and my 2 others are still here. And Amy was a bit of a mentor towards me. We all had the same, stress in the family, but being the only boy, somehow you get a little, amongst mothers and daughters, you get a little bit of extra status. And my sister Amy worked at Cooper's Bakery. I think she's making $1 an hour. And, if I needed like a pair of pants for some event in high school, she would go out. I remember to spend $10 or $15, which was a lot of money back then, to get me a new pair of pants, because I'd never asked my father, because then it'd have a screaming match. What do you need a new pair of pants for? But, just her giving ability was, I hope I picked up some of that anyway. And
you said you went to Fairleigh Dickinson. Tell me about that. What did you decide you wanted to major in? What was the major? Well, I kept the engineering thing, even though, I had failed trigonometry because I didn't like the teacher, and I was going to show her by not doing homework. And so guess who showed whom there? And I remember the F, and back then they'd write an F with red ink. Yeah. I remember just staring at that report card. And now when I apply to Fairleigh Dickinson, they say, sorry, son, you don't have trigonometry. You can't get into engineering. It's a true story. So I went to the registrar, and that's what she told me. And I said, well, what about summer school? And she said, no, sorry, summer school started last week. And I thought, what am I going to do here? So just by one of these, lightning strikes you get, I walked down to the class, the trigonometry class, and I waited outside until it was over. And I went up to the instructor and I said, please, can you let me into the class? I really know this stuff. I took it. I'm sure I can do well. And he said to me, I'm not supposed to do this. But he took out a piece of paper and he said, go down to the registrar, give her this slip, and she'll let you in. Wow.
And that was another one of these
He changed your life there.
serendipitous grace periods that, turned me
That
around.
professor may have completely changed altered your life completely. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because who knows? You might have done something else, right?
Yeah. When that registrar told me not allowed with a, sardonic grin, I didn't give up. And that's
right.
Probably the big key mark of my life is don't give up.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Were you an athlete as a kid?
Not a very good one. I always tried. When I played Little League ball, I was so bad that the coach used to say, Olsen, don't swing. Maybe you'll get a walk, because I could run fast and steal bases.
That's actually funny.
But, I went on. I kept at it, and I played Babe Ruth ball, and I made the All-Star team about 4 or 5 years later. And again, that's always come back to me, don't give up.
So you tried to go to the military, but you wanted to go to the military. You decided not to go to the military. And then after Fairleigh Dickinson, where did you go?
To University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And again, another serendipitous thing. A buddy of mine and I went to the New York Coliseum because they had a trade show going on. And at the trade show, you could get all these tchotchkes, like pocket protectors and pens and stuff like that. So we just go along collecting all this stuff. And finally, we came to this little booth that University of Virginia had set up. And the Dean of Engineering, Avery Catlin, said, sort of, come here, boys. He said, you ever think about University of Virginia? And he described the material science department. And I had studied physics and was getting pretty theoretical. And, after I got my master's degree in physics, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue. But the way he described material science is, hey, I'm in. And that's why I went to University of Virginia.
And you ended up getting a PhD there, is that correct?
Yes. And the physics, Fairleigh Dickinson had a very good physics department back then, because I was well prepared when I went to Virginia.
I did some research, obviously, before we do the interview. And as I told you earlier, I saw a gap between the PhD in material science and your first company. Well, not your first company. I thought it was your first company, but then I went back and I did a little research and I found another company called Epitax. But then you told me there's some other companies between all that, because there's a gap in the years, right? So can you tell me what you did between the PhD to the first company I've heard about, which was Epitax? But you have some stuff going on here.
All right. When I got my PhD in 1971, Vietnam was winding down, and the space race was also winding down because we'd been to the moon a couple of times. So there was a surplus of research scientists, and it was hard to get a job. So I went by the physics office, and I saw this sign for a postdoc position in South Africa, in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And Port Elizabeth, I'm thinking Newark, but no, this is 8,000 miles away. And okay, let me try it, because it's an opportunity. So I stayed over there in their physics department for a year and a half, teaching and doing research. And then by 1972, the job market had opened up a little bit, and I came to RCA Laboratories in Princeton. That's why I'm in Princeton now. It's because of RCA. And I started working on lasers and LEDs and photodetectors and all the stuff that led up to fiber optics. I did that for 11 years. And then I spun off my first company, Epitax, that you mentioned. Now, I had zero background in business. I hadn't even taken an accounting course. And I think if I had been well prepared, I probably wouldn't have done this, because it was very risky. But, I just said, I want to do it. And I sort of found myself. RCA treated me very well, but I was one of like 500 other PhD scientists. Here was something that was me. It was all Greg Olsen, and it's on your shoulders to either sink or swim. And I loved it.
And did you sell that company? Was that a success? Did you sell that company?
Started that in 1984. Sold it in 1990 to a Japanese firm, Nippon Sheet Glass. Stayed on for a year, and like many entrepreneurs, you leave and you start again. You recycle. And my second business was Sensors Unlimited with the infrared cameras. And when the whole telecom boom, the internet boom happened in 1999, 2000, things were just off the wall, and we got offered, just a tremendous amount of money, much more.
It was in the year 2000 that you sold that for 600 million?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And I said, I saw conflicting values on this, and it was basically because you sold it for stock and it was a public company. Is that
correct?
Right?
We were actually bought for 20 million shares of Finisar stock. Now, in 2000, everybody knew that stock was worth more than cash. Just like in 2007, everyone knew that real estate was worth more than cash. My employees, if I'd offer them a raise, they say, no, just give me more stock options instead. So, the stock at that time, I think on the day we closed, was $30, which is what gives you the $600 million figure.
Okay.
Now, that was fine. And then a year and a half later, the market had crashed, and those $30 shares were now only worth as low as 50 cents. So the fact that we bought the company back for $6 million isn't such a stretch when you think about going from $30 to 50 cents. But even though we bought the company back, we had to put more money into it and reorient it towards our roots of military imaging. And that's why 3 years later, we were bought by Goodrich Corporation for $60 million, but all in cash this time.
When you sold for the stock, did you exit out of that position completely, or did you get hurt on the decline?
A little of both, but I mostly exited. And but that was a tremendous learning experience, because we were given the stock, and many of the employees hung on to the stock. And being as Finisar was a public corporation, we couldn't tell anybody what to do. We had this chained into us. So we just said, get good financial counseling. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, hint.
So
sell the damn
a lot
stock.
of them do. They had an uncle, who's a bookkeeper somewhere, and they would advise them, no, stock, hang on to stock. And, a lot of them got hurt.
Yeah, that really stinks. That was a very closely held company too, right? Your Sensors Unlimited, right? Yep. So did you have venture capitalists or did you not have venture capitalists?
Not at Sensors, no. We did at Epitax. We had Warburg Pincus, where another mentor of mine, Henry Crisell, invested in us. But at Sensors, I used all my own money, the proceeds from Epitax, plus a thing called SBIR contracts. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. It stands for Small Business Innovative Research. Any kind of technology company, it's a great way to get free money from the government.
And those are grants then, right? That's what that is?
Yes.
Okay. So
you have
it's not like an SBA. You don't owe it back per se, right?
No. And you get to keep the patent rights too.
Wow. Did you get the patents in your personal name or was it in the company name?
They're always in the company name.
Yeah.
And I mean, at RCA, I think I had 11 patents. Wow. And look, they provided the means for me to get them, all the equipment and, the ability to learn. And, so I had no problem with that. Now, they gave us something like, I think, $200 every time we got a patent. But, you were the inventor, but the owner of the patent was RCA Corporation.
My grandfather, he passed away a couple of years ago, 95 years old. And he told me he worked for, I want to say it was either Ford or Chevy on the assembly line. And there was something on the assembly line that was inefficient. So he went to them and he gave them this idea, like, this is the way you should be doing it. And basically they used that and they gave him a bond, a $50 bond. So when you said 200, it reminds me of that. And then they kept the patent on whatever they did with it,
Yeah, well, he deserved more for that. I mean, my job was to invent things at RCA, so.
Yeah, he got screwed. That's okay. Let's talk about the space trip. I think this is one of the most interesting things. I've never spoken to anybody that's actually gone to outer space. For all those people out there that don't believe that you can go to outer space, here's a man that did it. So let's talk about that. So I read that it said that you spent $20 million. You estimated. Actually, I read that it says you estimated it cost you about 20. Why did you say it estimated? I feel like that's a big check. You should know. Yeah. Did you not write it, or was it a bunch of checks?
A little over 21 or something like that.
Okay.
Because after we sold, we bought back Sensors in the year 2002. Now my co-founder Marshall Cohen and I were sort of running the company, and after you've gone through this, I'm sure you've experienced it. You're sort of not mentally there anymore. And Marshall was he just took over the leadership. And one day I'm sitting in Starbucks, Princeton, in June of 2003, reading a paper. And I read this story about how it's possible for civilians to go into space. And the light went off, and I said, that's it. That's for me. And so I chased down Space Adventures, the company that arranged these trips. And I said, hey, I want in. Let's see, about 9 months later, I found myself in Russia training for a space mission. And I mean, that was quite a trip in quotes. I lived in a small village of a few thousand Russian people. Almost no one spoke English. I had an interpreter during my training, and it was like being back in college. You know, we get up at 6, we did it, ran around the lake, had breakfast, classes 9 to 4, more physical training, dinner, homework, get up, do it all over again. And I sort of liked that. So this was 2004. And after 2.5 months of training, they always did medical exams, and they found a small black spot on a lung x-ray. And since I had had a collapsed lung before, that's it, disqualified. And it was shattering. It was like, you know, getting fired or flunking out of school, or, you know, coming home and, you know, your wife has left, or, you know, that kind of devastation. And, you know, when I came back to the U.S., everyone said, hey, Greg, we thought you were going into space. And I had to tell the story all over again about the black spot. Turns out the black spot was harmless, it went away. So I reapplied, and I said, all right, let me back in. The answer was "niet," which means no in Russian. Yeah. Every month I would reapply, "niet, niet." It was like 8 times we try, and I get 8 no's. Now I'm starting to think, you know, maybe this isn't going to happen for me. And finally, my doctor, David Murphy, at Deborah Heart and Lung, who treated me for the lung condition, I asked him, would you come over to Russia with me and bring my medical records and convince them that I'm fit? And he said, okay. And his doctor went all the way from New Jersey with me. And we're sitting outside. We had a meeting with the medical corps in Russia. And he's sitting there with about 12 inches of x-rays and papers and so forth. And the Russian docs come out and they say, Olsen, we accept lungs. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I brought this guy with evidence, you know, 8,000 miles. But I had a sales guy who once told me, when he's trained new sales guys, listen, when you see the guy reaching in his pocket to write the order, just shut up and write it. You know, don't try and sell them the next generation. So I said, okay, thank you. And Murphy left, and I stayed and, you know, re-entered training. This is about 9 months later. And I got to fly the following year. But again, that thing about don't give up, again and again, it's happened in my life.
Persistence. Yeah, it's amazing. How did your family feel about you going to outer space? It's pretty scary.
On the surface, nobody gave me any grief about it. Now, you know, I say I had 3 sisters and 2 daughters. One or two of them might have had some reservations, but they never expressed anything but, hey, this is our crazy brother, Greg. You know, we wish him well, sort of thing. And they all came from my launch, by the way.
Where did you launch in Russia?
Yeah, from Kazakhstan. Actually, my oldest daughter, Kimberly, was pregnant with twins at the time, so she couldn't make the flight, but all the rest did.
I think I would be claustrophobic. I mean, that's pretty tight quarters when you're inside that, right?
Well, the capsule I landed in is actually on the Intrepid Museum in New York City. And so if you ever want to see a real space capsule with scorch marks and all, it's there. And yes, it is very crowded. Now, during the training, which was about 6 months for me, we rehearsed this a lot. You know, the 3 of us that we launched with astronaut Bill MacArthur and cosmonaut Valery Tokarev, we spent 3 or 4 hours a day in that cramped capsule doing training exercises. And if you were going to freak out over that, it would have come out. Just as we did centrifuge, you know.
Did you feel that disorientation at all in the beginning when you first started training?
Oh, sure. They intentionally disorient you because that will happen. The question is, you know, now some people get violently sick when they're disoriented. It's nothing to do about macho. It has to do with your inner ear.
Yeah.
I'm one of the lucky people that I don't seem to be subject to that. And, I didn't get any sickness. In fact, when I came back, European Space Agency asked me if I would be a guinea pig. And they put me through a day of all kinds of experiments, like turning me upside down, blindfolding me, and definitely got disoriented rather. I mean, I was hanging upside down, and they asked me, where is up? And I said, all right, up is this way, even though up was really that. That's normal, but I never got sick or felt any kind of discomfort other than, the orientation.
Have you ever put an Oculus on for VR, virtual reality?
Yes. Yep. And I don't get bothered by it.
Yeah, that made me feel weird. I was in Disney. I went to an experience thing, and at some point I was like, I got to see where I'm at. I took it off. I started losing my head a little bit. I'd imagine it feels a little bit like that as they're moving you around in those tests.
Now, here's something. I have a terrible sense of direction. And, at cocktail parties and so forth, I often do this little informal survey, and I said, how many of you get motion sickness? And a few people will say me. I say, how's your sense of direction? And the ones that get motion sickness, often, it's like about 80% will say, no, I have a great sense of direction. If I go someplace once, it's in, and vice versa.
As a kid, did you always dream about going to outer space? Is it just like something that
I dreamt about it because, I remember the beginning from Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin. But like many things, I also wanted to play Major League Baseball, for the Brooklyn Dodgers back then. But, I quickly realized in Little League and Babe Ruth, even though I made my local all-star team, that that was it. That was the end of my professional career.
Sure.
And I sort of felt the same way about space. This is something I'd love to do, but that you have to be a professional and test pilot and all this stuff. And I probably didn't have the right stuff. But there I was, age 60, I got to do it. Again, don't give up.
Interestingly, I have read a quote from you that you're not a fan of space tourism. I'm an investor in SpaceX, and I'm just curious, why are you not a fan of space tourism?
No, that gets bandied around a lot. It might have been with the phrase space tourism, because it implies, you just hop on a rocket and go. You can't do that. In fact, it requires a lot of training. So no, I'm all for private space flight. I'm a big proponent of it, and I hope all these people, Elon Musk, Virgin Galactic, Bezos, I hope they all succeed wildly, and that more and more people do get into space. I quibble about the phrase tourism. That's
right. And like you said, you have to be trained anyway. So I don't know. Like some people, they say that they're going to take spaceships essentially for travel and go into low orbit and then come back down for faster travel, because we can't seem to get the speed of the airplanes much faster. The Concorde used to be faster, but they're saying that. What do you think of that? Where they kind of, I guess they're really not going out of space, right? You're just going really super high and then coming back down.
I think my guess is that's something that SpaceX might be thinking about, as a revenue stream. Sure, because it's the friction that gets you. The Concorde and they were all made out of titanium and special metals and so forth to resist. And the skin would heat up to, 100 or 200 degrees centigrade. Once you get out of the atmosphere, you can go as fast as you want, pretty much.
Yeah, I got to ask you, because I've never spoken to anybody who did this. When you're going up there, how is your heart rate and all? I guess they're monitoring all that too, right? But how
yes, they are. Well, interesting. I had the lowest heart rate of the three of us.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of, people say to me, weren't you scared? And I said, I was scared. And what I was scared of was not going, because I'd already been rejected once. And even when we're walking out to the rocket to go, we have a medical belt on. And I'm wondering, what if they see something in my heart rate they don't like, and it's,
you're trying to calm yourself down.
Yeah. So when that rocket actually took off, when I felt the vibrations, it was like a yes thing.
This is happening.
Next 10 days.
How about when you started to see the fire coming across, right? Because you're going to see that inside the spaceship, and we never get to see that part from
actually, no, we don't on takeoff, and here's why. There's a shroud around us that covers
Oh,
all
okay.
the
It burns off.
windows, and that's to protect us as we're going up.
Okay.
So that gets blown off when we're about 50 miles high.
Right. And then when you're going through the actual atmosphere, you don't see the burning. You don't see the fire.
No,
Oh,
it's
wow.
only
Because
when
of
we
that,
get
because of the
out.
shroud.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a moment where you are actually weightless, right?
Yes, it's sort of like when you're in a roller coaster and you go up near the top,
Yes.
and all of a sudden you fall down.
And you kind of go up a little. Yeah.
It was great because
That's got to be a feeling of relief almost.
Yes, and the commander gets to pick like a Cupid doll as his souvenir, and when you see that thing floating, that's when you know you're in orbit.
Wow.
So we went from zero to.
I would imagine you also feel that you don't feel the pull anymore from the gravity, and that you lift up in your seat a little.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Can we go through a couple other things? So now you're up there, you got to go to the bathroom. You better make sure you don't mess that up.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
that's interesting. That's one of the differences between the shuttle and Soyuz. Now, as a Russian subject, we were given enemas before we left. So we were cleaned out. It took us 2 days to get to the space station. Now they can do it in like 4 to 6 hours, even less. But the toilet consists of like a vacuum cleaner hose.
Mm-hmm.
And, just the suction pulls the liquid in. On Soyuz, they had something, it looked like a teapot, and it was sort of an emergency if you had to go. Fortunately, I didn't. One of the good parts of weightlessness is it slows your digestion down. So it took me about 6 days before I went, and that's normal. But I wouldn't want to have to use that pot. Now, once we're on the space station, there's a more. It's almost like an outhouse. It's a little can you sit on,
And it sucks in whatever once you go, right?
Yeah, but still, this stuff hovers on the top, and the thing when you get off, you just slam that lid as quickly as you can.
And then when you're eating or drinking, if you miss it, it kind of just floats away on you. And then
That's
you
right.
try to capture that, and you have to recapture all the excess.
Sure. Well, we have filters, but
Okay.
you don't want to clog the filters up, which is why bread is packaged as like one piece, one bite-sized piece.
One at a
They
time.
don't want,
Okay.
they don't want all the crumbs going over.
And then they have certain types of food that you eat in outer space too, right? Dehydrated food? Or?
It's sort of like backpacking food. Beef stew, applesauce. The best thing I found were NASA shrimp cocktails. Now, they were dehydrated. So you had this long plastic bag, and we had a hot water heater with a hypodermic needle. And you'd slip the bag onto the hypodermic needle and then let hot water out and, mush this around, and you'd see the shrimp expanding. But the best part of it was there was hot sauce in it. Relatively hot sauce. So, most of the stuff was bland because they don't want, it's all dietitians figuring out what you can do to not get sick. So, but that was one of the few things I liked very much.
And then you all probably had specific things that you did while you were in the space station, and you being who you are as a scientist and engineer. What did you do there?
Okay. I wound up doing biological experiments for the European Space Agency. Originally, I had a very ambitious program of my own planned. NASA had a glove box where you could grow crystals, and I was going to grow a semiconductor crystal that I could bring back down to Earth and make detectors out of it. But they took the glove box out before I launched, so that went away. And then I was going to bring the Sensors Unlimited camera, which not only sees in the dark, but can see moisture or lack thereof. And I was going to image the Earth so we could see where there are healthy crops, not healthy crops, where they're dry or, liquid regions. And ITAR regulations, military restrictions prevented me from bringing the camera on board because we had to bring it through Russia and then Kazakhstan. And you would think, now, wait a minute, you're going into space, they'll make an exception. And the answer is no, they won't. So That's why I wound up doing biological experiments.
When you got up there and you finally turned around and looked at the planet Earth, what did that do to you psychologically? Has that changed your perspective on anything?
It just filled me with awe, because when you're up there, Earth looks like during the day, which is 45 minutes, it's about 90. It's just, there's no obvious sign of life. It's just a big blue sphere. Atmosphere scatters blue light the most, which is why, on a clear day, the sky is blue looking up, and it's the same looking down. It's just a big blue sphere. Now, after 45 minutes, when we get to the other side of the Earth, it's dark, and now you see lights from cities, so, which would imply some light. Yeah, we orbit every 90 minutes, so we make a total of 16 orbits a day.
Why does it do that? Why do they move so fast?
To stay in orbit.
Okay.
In order to, it's basic physics. In order to stay at roughly 250 miles above the Earth, you have to be traveling at a velocity of over 17,000 miles an hour, because you're always falling to Earth.
the
people
gravity.
think it's 0G, but that's a misnomer. The G is almost the same on the spaceship as it is on Earth. So as you're falling, you're also going outward at 17,000 miles an hour. So if you think about it, you're always falling into Earth, and that's what gives you the orbit. It's that balance.
Yeah. And so you're thrusting upwards away as you're doing that? Every once in a while it hits thrusters, so you're not pulling in, you're pushing out?
Yeah.
Or the speed itself does it?
Since there's essentially no air in space, there's very little friction. So you just keep going. You're in orbit. You go forever. Now there's a tiny amount of air friction, which eventually causes you to fall down. So once in a while, we have to boost up.
Okay. And do the satellites have to do the same?
Yes.
Okay. And there's thrusters that boost them every once in a while?
Yes. Now, some of them can last 10 or 20 years, but eventually that tiny, tiny friction will cause them to come down.
Right. And we've been lucky so far that hasn't fallen on a house. They usually fall into, I guess they choose where to make them fall so they can go into the ocean or something.
Well, one fell in Freehold a couple of years ago, and a woman's living. She was watching TV.
It hit her house or just?
Yeah, her house came right through the roof.
Who do you sue?
Didn't hurt anybody, fortunately.
Is that considered a force majeure?
I don't know.
I know your insurance is like, sorry, we don't cover satellites. Right. That's funny. Let me ask you. So that's by the way, thank you for sharing that story, because it's an amazing account. Not many people you can ask about their experiences in space. So, but to your point, let me just one more thing. You did have weightlessness while you're in there, even though there was not a 0G. To your point, it's very, very minimal gravity, I guess.
Right.
But if you sit still, you eventually slowly fall. What's that?
Yeah, there's no weight. That's the difference.
No weight. Yeah.
But the gravitational force on your body is essentially the same as it is on Earth, but it's that outward, that 17,000 miles an hour that the rocket originally gave you is what keeps you weightless.
Somebody was telling me recently that they're sending a spaceship around the moon and back. Have you heard about this?
Yes. I think
he's trying to pick people. He's a guy who bought all the seats.
Yeah.
And he's trying to pick some people to go with him, right?
I would love to do that trip, but I guess I missed out on the selection. So.
Did you apply?
No, I didn't actually.
Oh, okay. Do you think you would be able to get in today with the medical stuff? I mean, I don't know if you have any issues, but
being 76 doesn't help either. I think John Glenn was the oldest at 77.
Yeah.
Because once he was the first American to orbit. So just like Yuri Gagarin, they said, hey, you're a hero, no more flights, because we need you for PR to go around and give talks. So I guess after, some 20 odd years, they said to John Glenn, all right, we'll give you a reward. And plus he was a senator.
How many people have been to space?
It's roughly 550 humans that have orbited the Earth. The exact number keeps changing, keeps going up.
And over the next 20 years, do you assume that will just increase to the thousands now with companies like Gould?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And it will get increasingly cheaper over time and be more affordable. Mm-hmm. But of course, it'll be.
I don't think it's ever going to be like a couple of 100 degrees.
No.
Because A couple of $100, but
Dollars. Yeah.
it will definitely come down from $20 million.
Yeah, it
By
might
the
be
way,
several million and then hundreds of thousands over time.
Yeah. NASA was lastly paying about $80 million for that seat. So I guess I got a bargain.
That was a big check. I mean, even though what you sold and what you did, I mean, that's a big check that you wrote. That's
well,
amazing.
My financial advisor, Jim McLaughlin, came to my launch, and we had to do it in a series of payments, and the final payment was due at launch. He had the check in his pocket, and I said, Jim, I don't care if the rocket blows up, as long as you wait until that rocket takes off. But as soon as it takes off, then you hand them the final check, which is what he did.
That's amazing.
Yep.
What were your incremental checks then? How much were each check? You did this
it depended at which stage. I think the final one was $2 million. And it was insured by Lloyd's of London.
What was insured? The trip itself?
The whole trip.
In case you don't come back, essentially, for the family.
Yeah, or if I get injured and couldn't go on the trip, any contingency. It's about a 5% premium, if I remember.
If I have any more space questions, I'm going to come back to it. I want to move on to a few more questions here. What is your one superpower in your life? What's your superpower?
I'm not the best at anything, whether it's sports or golf or, studies. But I would say a combination of tenacity and the ability to hook up with good people. You probably know, if you're in business, a lot of people struggle. They want to be the best. They want to be the boss. They want to be the dynamic person, and which often causes them to hire below themselves. Now, I try and hire above myself, which I say only half jokingly isn't too hard to do. But in all my companies, I've always been able to accumulate good people. And now that I'm doing investments, people ask me, like, what industries do you invest in? I said, none. I say, I invest in people, 100%.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And the failures, I've had some failures in business, and it's always been CEO related. That you didn't, or management team that you didn't.
It's about decisions and making the right choices along the way.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your kryptonite?
Whew, boy, that's a hard one. Maybe. I think my kryptonite is realizing that I'm not the best in most things, but I use that to my advantage instead of, getting depressed and moping about it.
Sure. Let me ask you, Greg, you've had a lot of great success in your career. What continues and what did continue? Like, you sold your first was it $12 million, the first company you sold, right?
Yes. Of which I got just about $1 million out of it. And I thought I was the richest guy in the world.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So you everybody wants to become a millionaire. You get the $1 million. And then the goalpost moves further ahead. You're like, well, okay, we did that. We got to go to 10 million, and then you get to 10, right? So what keeps you motivated though? There's got to be a number that you're like, I don't really need any more money. No, it's not about money.
Correct. So. And I'm at that stage. And I find that the funny thing is, the less I care about it, the more seems to happen. And I'm less involved, and it just seems you make good picks. It's just that persistence, I think.
Were you obsessed too? Did you have obsessive behavior with your work, like working 7 days a week, always working a lot of hours?
And it was like when Henry Crisell invested in me, I felt that I didn't care what happened to me. I could take zero salary, but he was going to get paid back. If I had to go rob banks, I would have done it. I was not going to let this guy down. If he had the faith to invest in me, I was going to make sure that happened. And that's what drove me more than personal gain. And even today, it's always nice to get money, and, I like it as much as anyone else, but it's the success and watching other people become successful. One of my last investments that we sold, Power Survey, Tom Catanese, another great New Jersey guy, He just, to watch him, make it all happen essentially by himself. I mean, the best thing I did was invest in the company, number one, and number two, stay out of Tom's way, because he just had so much drive that I knew he'd do it. And I guess I'm smart enough not to meddle.
Yeah. As an investor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you say that. I had an angel investor, this guy named Bill. He worked on Wall Street, 30-year career, recently retired the last few years. And he told me that, and I was working out of my house with the one business. I had a previous company that was more successful, but then I was working from home to get this one off the ground. I was bootstrapping. And he writes a check after 3 years in the company. He calls me up and he's like, I'm investing in you, not your industry, not the market opportunity size, none of that stuff, because he could see in my eyes that I would sooner die before I allowed failure to happen. I think that's what you're basically saying, that you had done with yourself. And I didn't know that, because you don't, from a self-awareness perspective, I didn't know that that's really how I was. I was like, oh, I appreciate the comment. And then even to this day, he says, I knew you would never fail because it wasn't an option, right? And I think most successful entrepreneurs, I think, share that view, right? Yeah, totally. How did you balance work life? Did it impact your personal relationships, wife, kids, anything like that, because of how obsessive you were?
Yeah, I've been divorced a long time, for over 40 years. So, I've been a single dad and a single grandfather. Professional life helped my personal life. Things like just simple things, not yelling at people, when stuff like that, that to this day I see all the time. I say, you idiot, you're the president of the company. You're yelling at this person in public. How can you disrespect them? And do you realize what you're doing? So anyway, I learned that in the business sense, and I brought it back into my personal life, and whatever else. I think I've had a number of relationships since I've been divorced, but I'd like to think that in time I've gotten better, and a lot of that has come from business. I mean,
so you become self-aware by watching others, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 100% about relationships for me. Yeah. I mean, I could be certified obsolete as a scientist, even though I was reasonably good in my day, but I still carry the titles and all, but what I can bring to the table is, I think, relationships.
Competitiveness. So psychologically, do you compete with others or yourself?
Myself. I don't like to compete. I like to win. and that's another thing. I find a lot of people I interact with are competitive, like in golf, I play golf. I try and play a couple of times a week if I can. I just want to get a good score. And if you have a lower one, hats off, and I'll buy you a beer and I'll be your friend. I don't wish that you're going to have a lousy score so that, I can win. I just want to win. That's what I've always focused on, not showing somebody else up.
So you're addicted to the success. You're addicted to the results or the success?
The success, because results can always vary.
Sure.
But success is the ultimate outcome.
So I'm from what I'm hearing, this is one of my questions here. Would you rather be feared or liked? That's a good question here, because I do think you want to be liked, and I don't know if it's fear is the right word, but you need to be respected, I guess, right?
Yeah.
You can't be a pushover and be too nice.
If I have to choose, I'd rather be respected. Because, the like is something you don't always have control over, which is something I've found, I'm sure you've seen it yourself. After success, you think everybody loves you and stuff like that. That's not true.
No.
And you just have to live with that. You're not going to change it.
Yeah, there's jealousy in the human DNA, obviously, for some people. So that's something that I think we found when my wife and I were co-founders. There's some weirdness but let me ask you about that. Personal relationships, friends, they're people you thought were friends. Once you've had great success and you've kind of escaped velocity away from everybody, hate to use the word because you're a cosmonaut, right? But you get this kind of financial escape velocity at some point, right?
For the most part, it all remained unchanged. And I think enough people have told me that they think it hasn't affected me. And
I don't think it affects you. I think it affects how other people perceive you, which is a weird dynamic.
Oh, sure.
Because you don't change, right? It's I think having a lot of money exasperates who you are. You're either an asshole or you're a good person. And if you get a lot of money and you're an a-hole, you're going to be a really bad one.
Yeah. The thing that anyone that's been successful happens with both friends and family are the requests for money.
Yeah.
And it usually starts, I just want to pick your brain. That's when the red flag goes up.
You're like, I'm busy right now. It always leads into the ask. What about trust? How trusting are you with others? It leads into that question there.
Very trusting. And here's my theory. I've been very fortunate in life, and it's basically because I do trust people and I trust outcomes, and I think things are going to work out well. And I would say 98% of the time it's worked for me. The few times I've been screwed over in life, I could never see it coming. It just happened, it was like quickly hit from behind. And I've learned, all right, just deal with it and go on, but I'm not going to change. I'm not going to all of a sudden lock all my doors, and I'm just,
for sure,
I'm very trusting.
Basically, people are inherently good, and sometimes there's some bad actors.
Yeah.
What about the lawsuits, though? If you're in business long enough and you've had a lot of scale in your business too, I'd imagine you had to deal with some lawsuits, right? So have you to deal with lawsuits? What about after selling? So the business says you had to deal with lawsuits, and then personally, have you ever had to deal with any lawsuits?
Fortunately, so far, no personal ones. In the business, yeah. And that's why when people ask me, who's your lawyer? I say, which one? You're talking
Depends what we're talking about.
And this is another thing you learn by going into business. It's just like doctors. It's not one doctor. And the guy who does your corporate probably isn't going to do litigation for an auto accident, and on and on and on. So
Warren Buffett says it takes 20 years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it.
I believe
how
it.
important. Yeah. And how important is your reputation to you, and how do you assess reputation of others?
Yeah, it's very important to me because I want people to trust me. I just finished a business deal last week, and it was we did a handshake, and to me that was a contract with a notarized seal on it. Once I just can't, and I like to be around people that'll like that. The ones where they come back, I'm not sure, and all this stuff that. I don't like that. And I think you tend to gravitate to people that have that same ethic as you do.
Well, I met you through a person, Jim Gunton from Tech Council Ventures. I imagine we're both LPs. You're an LP in his fund as well?
No, I wasn't his first one.
First one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously he's a great guy. So I'd imagine that's, in terms of reputation and stuff.
They had a great return. It was 4X, and, it was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's amazing. And I think they still have some unrealized stuff in their fund still, don't they? Yeah. So it might even, I wasn't in that one. I pitched him years ago. And then when I sold my company, he congratulated me, and then we kept in touch, and that's how I got into the new one. Why did you pass on the new one, by the way?
It's sort of like this, I like to be in control of my own money. And Jim is a good friend of mine, and, we talk level with each other. And, he pitched, and I said, listen, the 4X was great, but it took 16 years. I said, so if I do this, I'm going to be 86 by the time. I said, I want to see it now.
So it's nothing personal, Jim.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. But so you basically have GHO, which we haven't talked about. That's your family office fund, I guess. Is that what that is?
Yes.
Yep. Do you have LPs, or is it just your own money?
No, just me.
Yeah,
I have a lean staff. I have my assistant, Jennifer Kennedy, is in Ohio. She's worked for me for 26 years, and remote has been really great. We have in the Princeton office, we have Olga Reptashenko, who handles the office. Ivan Lamb does all our IT work, and I rent him out to other companies for IT. They've all been with me for like 20 odd years.
Oh, so you've had GHO for a very long time, even when you were invested in other companies?
I'd say about 15 years, right after I came back from space.
Okay. Yeah, my wife and I started our own little thing too. It's called Gould Ventures. I guess yours is your name too, GHO. I'd imagine H is your middle initial.
Yeah, Hammond.
Okay. So why still invest? What's the point? You got all the money. You don't need more money. What do you just like meeting with the entrepreneurs and being a part of it?
I've done a fair amount of charitable work, and that's another thing you probably have in common with me. I feel really lucky to get to where I am, and I feel it's not requested, it's required that you pay back.
Reciprocity.
Now you have to figure that out, and you can't, as you know, you get the luge with causes and so forth, and you can't do everything. But I try and pick the things that are close to me, like the universities I've been to, and really help them.
And so when you invest in companies for profit, though, in some ways it's a reciprocity, right? Because people invested in you early on, helped you to get to where you're at. So you're kind of giving it back.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, just everybody who's listening to this, don't contact Greg if you don't have a good business plan. He's not giving people away money for free. You got to have a good business too, right? Because it's kind of a game. You're playing a game with smart intellectuals, and you're giving capital towards that, right?
Yeah.
What are you most proud of in your life?
That I came from, a modest background, and I was able to make something of myself and also to help others. I have 6 grandkids, and my 2 grandsons, Justin and Carter, are down at University of Virginia, just like I was. And, the pride you have in that is just unbelievable.
What are you most proud of professionally?
I guess both my Epitax and Sensors Unlimited, the 2 companies. I have 12 patents. I would say I was a decent scientist. I was, B plus research scientist. I like to think of myself, but I got to be an A as an entrepreneur.
What is your biggest regret in life?
Not spending the time with my 2 daughters. When they were growing up, that's when I had Epitax, and I was, working the 12-hour days. Even though we were divorced, I had a very good divorce. That's something, having access to the kids wasn't an issue or any of that stuff. But I was always working so late, so I missed a lot of school plays, softball games, and so forth. And I resolved when I had grandkids, I'm not going to let this happen. And I have been to many more events of my grandkids than I did to my daughters. Nevertheless, I'm very close with my 2 daughters, and now.
Do you think you could have had the success if you had a little bit better balance in your work life, or do you think that it was kind of necessary and that's why it was what it was?
Hard to say. I mean, you have to be who you are.
Yeah.
And it probably wouldn't have worked out as well either way.
Right. And what about your daughters? So has this conversation ever happened with them where they talk and ask, like, why did you work so much, Dad? Or you're pushing the gas pedal too hard? Yeah.
My oldest daughter, Kimberly, lives in Spain with her daughters, so I only get to see her once or twice a week. My other daughter, Krista, is in Colts Neck, and I see her weekly.
Okay.
In fact, I'm going to see her tomorrow. So, we have much more contact. But yeah, I've talked to them about it, and I now they understand. Maybe back then, not so much.
Yeah, they're not going to get it as kids, right? That's true. I have 4 kids, 2 oldest are daughters, and then 2 boys. And I don't think they even know that I'm always working and doing things. It's just normal to them, probably. Right. If they go to their friend's house, maybe with the other parents, they'll start to realize it's not so normal. Do you remember I think we talked about this when you first became an actual millionaire, and people define millionaire differently. It's like, take the house and the assets out, you got $1 million in cash sitting in the bank. When you finally had that, was it an event or was it an accumulation? And how did you feel about it?
Oh, I can tell you exactly when. It was United Bank of Jersey. When we sold Epitax, there was this woman, Wilma Roberta. I remember her name. And she was the woman that had my account. And I would call her up and I said, "Is the check in?" "No, not yet. Not yet." About the 4th time when I called her up, she said, I've never seen a check for over $1 million. I think it was 1.2 million, something like that. And that was yes. And I said, I'm going to come over and get a copy of that. And, you know, just to see it, I said, now I'm a millionaire. So, and, you know, in terms of a boost, that was like a psychological boost, much higher than the $600 million at Sensors, of which I only saw a fraction of that. But
yeah. We had partners in VCs and stuff, right? So, well, actually, in that one you had less because of Epitax. Is that correct?
Right.
Less,
but I had
investors,
about,
but more
because
equity.
I gave a lot away to my, you know, co-founders, and we had good people. But I don't know, I probably had about 50% of that.
Okay, yeah, and then you got taxes. People, you don't get to keep it all.
Yep.
At least it was long-term capital gains. Yep. Which I think back then were lower taxes. Was it 15% back then? It was a much lower. At least under Bush, it might have been. I'm not sure.
20, if I remember, it was 20.
We're about the same these days. Yeah. Okay. And roughly, how old were you when that happened? The first million?
Let's see. Well, my first company, I was that was 90, so I was 45. My first one, and I was 55 for the second one.
Okay. And so what did you do? Did you make a big purchase when you first made $1 million, or you just said, nope, we're moving on?
Well,
I got
my
the money in the
first
bank,
one,
moving on.
Yes, I bought a red Mercedes convertible.
Okay. Everybody buys it. Everybody I ask this, Greg, everybody I ask this question to buys a car. Every guy buys a car.
Sure. But I did it wisely, and anyone that of my companies, when they're successful and they cash out, I say, listen, buy that hot car you always wanted, and buy your wife the biggest diamond ring you can find. I said, and that's it. Don't spend anything more for a year. I tell them 1 year. Don't buy a summer house. Don't loan your relatives money. Don't do anything for 1 year.
Mm-hmm. That's what we did. It's funny you say that. And that guy I was telling you about he's a great friend, advisor, mentor, and he was my investor. And he had made millions of dollars many years before. And he said the same thing. He's like, don't do anything, no big purchases. If you still want it later, but you find you really don't. Right? That's the funny part of the game that he's playing, right? Because you realize I have everything I need.
Yeah, that's the thing about the first million. It can change you. You know, when you get to the 10 and 50 and 100, they don't really change you.
No,
they just make your bank account bigger.
Right. It's like I said before, it's kind of a game at that point. It's like you're just keeping a score of how I'm doing. That's all that is. Yeah. It's not chill. So I was going to ask you though. So then you get to the first, the next one, you get to 100 million plus. It doesn't change you. You didn't buy anything for it at that point. It's just accumulation at that point. Are you thinking at that point it's mostly about my kids and my grandkids now?
Yeah. Although I'm careful, I want them to have the kind of success I have. And especially my two boys. I mean, my oldest grandson, Justin, we share the same middle name, Hammond. And, if I could wish anything for him, it would be find success. And I don't care what it is. You know, you don't have to be an entrepreneur and make $100 million, but just find something and do it well. You know, if you want to start a band, it's not for me to say what it is, but I want you to be happy. That's the thing. And I look at it this way: if someone had limited financial resources, but were pursuing their dreams, I'd be more inclined to help them than, if they had a regular job or something. But I want them to make their own money rather than mine.
So are you gonna leave an inheritance, or just a very minimal inheritance and then donate the rest of it to charity, or what are you doing?
Most of mine is going to go to charities.
Yeah. And then enough for them so that
that example.
There's enough that they don't have to have debt in life.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because that is like I always say we're debt slaves, right? Unfortunately, that's the system that we're in, this fiat system that we have with the central banks. It's like they're making you run on the hamster wheel to go to trade your hours for dollars, right? Wow. It's unfortunate.
Just a quick aside: both my daughters already got theirs because when I started Sensors Unlimited, I said, well, I'll give them each 5% of the stock. Maybe it'll be a down payment on the house.
Yeah. Whoa.
Who knew?
That's amazing. And that is great for them. So what's great about that is they don't have to come to dad asking any, can you help me here or there? They're taken care of. And I'm sure you hook them up with your financial advisors too. So
yes,
that's great. So let me ask you, have you gotten to billionaire status, or you're not a billionaire?
Not yet. I'm on my way, but not there yet.
And it's not necessarily a goal of yours, or is it a goal just from a scorecard perspective and then donate it all?
Yeah, if it happens, great. And if not,
it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Right. You're not buying houses in Palm Beach for $50 million.
No, I have enough. I have a ranch in Montana. I have a winery in South Africa. I have an apartment in New York. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Right. And if you go to New York, you only have the apartment, so you don't have to drive back down to Jersey, right, for the night when you go see a show.
Exactly.
That's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
We're not doing a hotel. We're just staying for the night. Yeah. That's so funny. Philanthropy. Can you tell me what you do? Do you have a separate organization that does that, or do you just choose charities of your choice?
Yeah, it's my own. I'm involved with a Boys and Girls Club. One I've gotten highly involved in the last 2 years is the Trenton Literacy Movement. It's started by Doug Palmer and a bunch of his associates. What they're trying to do is to get kids in Trenton by third grade to read above average. People say, well, the 50th percentile. No, that's not good. We want these kids reading above average. And if there's any problems, we get whoever the parents or guardian, they have to commit to just allow the kids. We'll pick them up. We have vetted people that'll pick them up on the weekends, but they come in for a couple of hours on a Saturday. During the summer, they have camps and sort of reading. And, I, being a scientist, I said, well, what about math? They said, math is good, but how can you do math if you can't read? And I mean, there's some logic there. So, but I'm very much involved in that. Of course, my universities, Fairleigh Dickinson, University of Virginia, I wouldn't be here talking to you without them. So Deborah is very, not only for me, but for my family. We collapsed lungs run in our family. It's one of our genetic limitations. So they've really helped us out a lot. So, I try and pay
others, kids or grandchildren have the same issue, or is it passed down? Or
it hasn't happened to the grandkids yet, but it's happened to one of my daughters and several nieces and two of my sisters. So it's
interesting.
Yeah.
What is the condition called?
Pneumothorax, spontaneous pneumothorax. Now, you probably know collapsed lung, like if you get an auto accident and you get whacked in the chest, your lung will collapse. That's normal. It'll heal and so forth. But in our case, if you ever see a cheap glass with bubbles in the bottom, our lungs have those bubbles in, and sometimes they can just, collapse spontaneously.
That's amazing. What does that feel like when it happens? You just have a shortness of breath. You can't breathe.
Interestingly, in my case, I didn't know about it. I was on a hike in Switzerland about 20 years ago, and there was two guys with me. They were about 15 years younger, and they're leaving me in the dust. And I said, something's wrong here. And so I went back, had an exam, and found out I was only working on one lung. Wow. Now, my daughter, Kimberly, she had chest pains, and they thought she was 40 years old. They thought she was having a heart attack. They put her through all the missions. No, everything's perfect. And then one guy finally said, let's do a chest x-ray. And she was and
they can see it just on the x-ray.
Dr. Murphy from Deborah, she was in San Diego. He talked them all through what to do. Don't do that, do this, do that. And she was fine.
Part of my show, and I told you this when we spoke last week, part of my show, it would talk about Bitcoin. I said, do you own Bitcoin? You said, no, I don't own Bitcoin. You're 76 years old. You don't need more money. So it's not like you necessarily need to take the risk on Bitcoin. Do you know much about Bitcoin? Have you researched it at all?
Actually, I don't. Other than, the one or two articles I read about it. I don't understand it fully. And what I do understand is that it's possible to lose it without a trace. So, when you get to our position financially, you want to be a laggard, not a leader in how you spend your money, So I've got a great financial advisor. I've had him for 20 years, and, I hope it'll be another 20 plus years.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm in these groups with a bunch of I would say the influencers that are in Bitcoin, the early adopters to Bitcoin. They've done a phenomenal job. I've spoken to a lot of these people, and they say the wealthy will have to do it eventually. And I say, that's exactly right. Eventually, they may have to do it if the collapse of the system is happening, and this is the place that you store value over time. But there's no urgency, right? What's the point? You have hundreds of millions of dollars. What do I need to go into Bitcoin for? Right. Like, tell me when I need to go into Bitcoin, I guess is the point. You're in wealth preservation mode. You don't need to take on risk for growth, right? Yeah. I think it's an important point that you're a wealthy individual, likely become a billionaire if you live long enough and you make the right investments, but there's really no need to do that. So I think people that are in the Bitcoin community just need to understand from a perspective of someone who's wealthy, has a tremendous amount of wealth, doesn't need to take on growth like that, right? You're growing anyway. You have what I call financial escape velocity. It just compounds even if you didn't do anything. You just buy the S&P. You're just going to keep growing forever, right? Yeah. Yep. I just wanted to touch on that very briefly. We talked about it. I know it's not your forte per se, but I just needed the community to understand from a perspective of a person who's pretty wealthy, it's not necessarily on the radar.
Yeah. By the way, a little tip back to you. I did watch Anthony Scaramucci's interview with you. I thought that was very good. And I saw this morning where he's going to move his conference back to the Javits Center. I thought that was really good.
Have you met Anthony? Do you know him? Do you know Anthony?
I've never met him, no.
Okay. Great guy. He's a family friend, I think you saw in the interview. So I've known him for a long time. Yeah, he's a good guy. Listen, I don't want to take up too much. You've been very generous with your time. And I appreciate you coming on the show as a guest. And I loved hearing your story. And I'm sure everybody else will. We're going to edit this up. It's going to look beautiful. And again, thank you very much. For everyone out there, it's Greg Olsen, entrepreneur, scientist, cosmonaut, and venture capitalist, and a really good guy. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.